There was a time in American kitchens when nothing went to waste and everything went into the casserole dish. Pineapple met mayonnaise, Spam got cozy with peanut butter, and even sardines found their way into banana bread. These weren't just recipes. They were survival tactics, born from war rationing, the Great Depression, and a fearless sense of culinary curiosity. From pickled beet and marshmallow bake to jellied chicken salad ring, from the bizarre sweetness of cocoa and cabbage cake to the daring Bologna and grape jelly Hotdish. Each dish tells a story of a time when cooks had to make the impossible edible. Some were surprisingly delicious, others unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. But all of them capture a moment in history when creativity ruled the kitchen, no matter how strange the results. So get ready, because today we're uncovering 30 more forgotten casseroles that America once loved or feared. And by the end, you might just be glad some recipes stayed in the past. Pineapple, mayonnaise, bread pudding, together in one casserole dish. To modern ears, it might sound like the punchline to a bad joke, but in mid-century America, it was a proud potluck centerpiece. The 1940s and 1950s were the golden age of sweet meets savory cooking, when canned goods, convenience foods, and post-war optimism collided in the kitchen. Pineapple had risen to stardom decades earlier, thanks to Dole's massive marketing campaigns of the 1920s. By the time World War II ended, nearly every American pantry held a can or two, ready to bring tropical flair to desserts and sides. Mayonnaise, meanwhile, was enjoying its own heyday. It wasn't just for sandwiches. Home cooks saw it as a miracle ingredient. Made from oil, eggs, and vinegar, mayo added moisture, tang, and richness to baked goods. In leaner years, it even replaced butter or milk entirely. The pineapple and mayonnaise bread pudding casserole was born from this inventive spirit. Recipes began appearing in church cookbooks, women's magazines, and junior league collections across the Midwest and South. Day-old bread was cubed and soaked in a custard of crushed pineapple, mayonnaise, sugar, and eggs. After baking, the pudding emerged golden, fragrant, and slightly tangy, its flavor a curious blend of dessert and side dish. Some served it warm with whipped cream or a drizzle of caramel sauce. Others leaned savory, pairing it with roasted ham or pork. Guests often didn't know whether to eat it before the main course or after. But somehow, the dish had a way of disappearing before anyone decided. Its decline came quietly. As American tastes shifted in the 1970s and 1980s, mayonnaise in sweet baking fell out of favor. Newer generations found the idea strange, even unappetizing, and the casserole slipped into obscurity. For those who remember, it's more than a recipe. It's a slice of history, a reminder of a time when frugality, creativity, and fearless combinations defined the dinner table. It sounds impossible, or maybe even a little unthinkable, but in post-war America, Spam and peanut butter came together in a single loaf, and people proudly served it to company. The idea was born in the 1940s, during an era when meat was rationed, creativity was a survival skill, and Spam was king. Introduced in 1937, Spam quickly became a wartime staple. It was shelf-stable, packed with protein, and endlessly adaptable. For many families, it was the meat that got them through lean years. Peanut butter, meanwhile, had its own place in the American pantry. Rich in protein and calories, it was considered both economical and nourishing, a perfect partner for stretching small amounts of real meat. By the mid-1940s, thrifty home economists and cookbook authors began pairing the two in inventive, if unusual, ways. The Spam and peanut butter baked loaf was one such creation. The recipe called for Spam to be finely ground or mashed, then mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and a generous scoop of peanut butter. Shaped into a loaf and baked until firm, it emerged with a salty, sweet aroma and a surprisingly creamy texture inside. The peanut butter acted as both binder and flavor booster, giving the loaf a nutty richness that complemented the cured meat. Some homemakers glazed the top with ketchup or brown sugar for extra sweetness. Others sliced and served it cold for sandwiches, claiming it tasted better the next day. It was the kind of dish that baffled newcomers, but earned loyal fans in kitchens where nothing went to waste. By the 1970s, as fresh meat became more affordable and processed combinations fell out of fashion, the Spam and peanut butter loaf quietly vanished from most tables. Today, it survives mainly in the yellowed pages of vintage cookbooks and the memories of those who grew up eating it. Was it delicious? That depends on who you ask. But one thing's certain, it was a true testament to the ingenuity of American home cooking in hard times. Sauerkraut and apple pie casserole, two flavors that couldn't be more different. Tangy, briny sauerkraut and sweet, cinnamon-spiced apples. Yet in certain corners of America, they met in one bubbling casserole dish, and the result was surprisingly beloved. The roots of this unusual pairing stretch back to immigrant kitchens of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. German settlers brought sauerkraut-making traditions, while apple pies were already deeply woven into American food culture. In rural communities, both ingredients were staples. Sauerkraut provided vitamin-rich preserved cabbage for the long winters, and apples, especially when stored in cool cellars, could last for months. The idea of combining them gained traction during the Great Depression and into the 1940s. Frugality ruled the kitchen, and nothing that could be eaten went to waste. Cookbooks and homemaker columns began to feature the sauerkraut and apple pie casserole as a way to stretch small amounts of meat, enhance flavor, and turn two humble ingredients into a filling dish. The recipe varied by region. In the Midwest, sliced apples were layered with sauerkraut, onions, and bits of smoked pork or sausage, then topped with breadcrumbs and baked until the flavors mingled. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, cooks leaned sweeter, adding brown sugar, cinnamon, and butter to create a dish that straddled the line between savory and dessert. The magic, according to those who loved it, was in the balance. The sauerkraut's acidity cut through the apple's sweetness, creating a bright, complex flavor that paired beautifully with pork roasts or holiday ham. But to others, it was a culinary crime, a recipe best left in the past. As post-war prosperity brought more variety to grocery shelves, many households moved away from such make-do combinations. By the 1970s, the casserole was fading into obscurity, remembered mostly in tight-knit farming and Amish communities. Bologna e Grape, Jellied, Hotdish. It's the kind of pairing that makes you blink twice. Thick slices of Bologna smothered in a glossy, sweet grape jelly glaze. Odd today, yes. But in mid-century America, this was potluck gold. The story begins in the 1950s and 60s, when processed meats like Bologna reigned supreme. Affordable, shelf-stable, and endlessly versatile, it was the darling of the convenience cooking boom. Food companies and home economists urged housewives to get creative, and America fell hard for sweet and savory experiments. Enter grape jelly. Post-war kitchens always had a jar on hand, thanks to industrial canning, better refrigeration, and the marketing muscle of brands like Welch's. Its sugary punch and sticky texture made it perfect for glazes. Somewhere in the Midwest, these two pantry staples met, and the Bologna and grape jelly hotdish was born. The method was simple. Arrange slices or rolls of Bologna in a casserole dish. Whisk grape jelly with mustard and maybe a splash of vinegar. Pour it over, and bake until the edges curled and the glaze turned into a tangy sweet shell. Some cooks added pineapple rings or bell pepper strips for color. Others served it over buttered noodles or mashed potatoes. It was quick, cheap, and, most importantly, a guaranteed crowd pleaser. Kids adored the candy-like flavor, while adults enjoyed the salty, sweet contrast. Church suppers, school fundraisers, and block parties all saw pans of this purple-tinted creation disappear in minutes. But as tastes evolved in the late 20th century, Bologna's star dimmed. Fresh meats became the norm, and the thought of pairing deli slices with jelly started to feel kitschy. By the 1990s, this hot dish had mostly vanished, surviving in old recipe cards and the memories of those who grew up with it. Pickled beet and marshmallow bake, the sweet and sour surprise of mid-century tables. Picture this. It's a Sunday in 1958. The air smells faintly of baked ham, strong coffee, and something no cookbook today would dare suggest, a casserole dish where jewel-red pickled beets sit under a fluffy blanket of melted marshmallows. It sounds absurd now, almost like a dare. But back then, this dish wasn't a joke. It was a proud centerpiece at church potlucks, holiday spreads, and ladies' luncheons. The logic was simple. America in the mid-20th century loved two things: bold contrasts and eye-catching presentation. Pickled beets brought that tangy, vinegar-kissed punch. Marshmallows, which had exploded in popularity thanks to post-war sugar abundance, brought creamy sweetness and a dramatic golden top once broiled. The recipe likely evolved from older sweet and sour pairings common in Pennsylvania Dutch and Southern cooking, where cooks combined fruits with vinegar-laced vegetables. But the 1950s twist was pure marketing genius. Marshmallow companies were constantly looking for unexpected uses for their product. Recipe pamphlets promised that pairing them with vegetables made them fun for kids and memorable for guests. Preparation was laughably simple. Drain a jar of pickled beets, arrange them in a buttered casserole, sprinkle with a little brown sugar, and top with marshmallows. 10 minutes in a hot oven, and you had a dish that shimmered with color and confused every taste bud at the table. Some swore it was the perfect foil to savory meats. Others politely passed. But whether loved or loathed, it was unforgettable. Today, the pickled beet and marshmallow bake is a relic, a strange culinary postcard from a time when American kitchens dared to shock as much as they aimed to please. And honestly, isn't it kind of tempting to try just once? Cabbage jelly ring. Picture this: a shimmering, quivering ring of pale green jelly, proudly sitting at the center of a 1940s dinner table. Inside its translucent folds, thin shreds of cabbage, bits of pimento, maybe even celery or onion, all suspended in a savory gelatin mold. Today, it sounds like a dare, but back then, the cabbage jelly ring was a symbol of resourcefulness and presentation. Its roots trace back to World War II, when meat, butter, and fresh produce were rationed, and homemakers had to stretch every scrap. Gelatin wasn't just for dessert. It became a vehicle for turning humble vegetables into something that looked impressive enough for guests. Cabbage, with its long shelf life and low cost, was the perfect filler. The recipe often started with plain, unflavored gelatin, dissolved in vegetable broth or even leftover pickle juice for zing. Once cooled slightly, it went to shredded cabbage and whatever colorful accents the cook had on hand: diced carrot, green pepper, or pimento. It was then poured into a ring mold, chilled until firm, and turned out onto a plate lined with lettuce leaves. For an extra flourish, a dollop of mayonnaise or salad dressing filled the center hole. To mid-century hosts, this wasn't strange. It was elegance on a budget. The jelly's wobbly texture contrasted with the crunch of cabbage, creating what cookbooks called a refreshing salad course. Guests were expected to slice it neatly, just like cake, each wedge revealing a mosaic of vegetables inside. By the 1970s, tastes had shifted and savory gelatin salads began to vanish. But in its heyday, the cabbage jelly ring was proof that even the simplest ingredients could be dressed up for company. In a time of shortages, it offered not just nourishment, but a sense of pride and creativity at the dinner table. Tomato soup cake. What if I told you that one of America's most beloved mid-century cakes started with a can of tomato soup? Yes, you heard that right. Campbell's tomato soup cake wasn't a prank. It was a Depression-era stroke of genius. The recipe first appeared in community cookbooks in the late 1920s, when ingredients like fresh eggs, butter, and milk could be too costly for struggling families. Tomato soup brought both moisture and acidity, replacing dairy and balancing the sweetness of the cake. Once baked, the soup's tomato flavor all but vanished, leaving behind a moist, spice crumb that could rival gingerbread. By the 1940s and 50s, Campbell's had fully embraced the trend, printing the recipe on soup labels and in glossy magazine ads. They marketed it as a mystery cake, something that would wow your guests until you revealed the secret ingredient. Housewives took pride in serving at bridge club meetings and Sunday suppers, each with their own twist: raisins, walnuts, cream cheese frosting, or a dusting of powdered sugar. But here's the hidden magic. Tomato soup wasn't just a budget trick. Its natural acidity acted as a preservative, meaning the cake stayed fresh for days, even without refrigeration. That was a lifesaver in an era when iceboxes were still a luxury for many. Today, tomato soup cake is almost unheard of outside vintage cookbooks and the memories of those who grew up with it. But for families in the Depression and wartime years, it was proof that creativity could turn even the humblest pantry item into a centerpiece dessert. A reminder that sometimes the sweetest things are born from the strangest ideas. Peanut butter stuffed onions. The recipe that made no sense until you tried it. What would you say if I told you that, once upon a time, American housewives proudly served onions stuffed with peanut butter? It sounds like a dare from a cruel older sibling, but in the 1930s and 40s, it was considered clever, even gourmet. The Great Depression had already taught families to stretch every penny. Then World War II brought strict rationing of meat, butter, and sugar. The home kitchen became a battlefield of creativity, and peanut butter, cheap, filling, high in protein, was a hero ingredient. Onions, meanwhile, were one of the few fresh vegetables available year-round, sturdy enough to store through winter without spoiling. Some genius, or mad scientist, decided to combine them. The process was simple but strange. Onions were boiled whole until this tender, then hollowed out like tiny bowls. The centers were mixed with peanut butter, breadcrumbs, and a dash of mustard or vinegar for tang. The mixture went back into the onion shells, then into the oven for a gentle bake. The result? A bizarre marriage of sweet, nutty richness and the sharp bite of baked onion. Magazines like Good Housekeeping printed it without irony. Wartime pamphlets from the USDA called it a tasty, sustaining side dish, code for it'll keep you full and it's cheap. For children, it was often a dinner table nightmare. For adults trying to feed a family on ration stamps, it was a small victory of resourcefulness. And here's the twist. Those who braved a bite often found it strangely satisfying. The peanut butter mellowed the onion's bite, while the onion kept the peanut butter from feeling sticky or cloying. Today, it's a recipe that lives mostly in yellowed cookbooks and family lore, a reminder that American food history is filled with ideas born from necessity, not luxury. Peanut butter stuffed onions, the 1940s dinner dare. Imagine walking into a 1940s kitchen, the warm smell of roasted onions filling the air, and then realizing they're stuffed, not with breadcrumbs, not with cheese, but with peanut butter. Yes, peanut butter. This wasn't some prank gone wrong. It was an actual wartime dinner. During World War II, food shortages forced American home cooks to rethink every plate. Meat was rationed, dairy was scarce, and cooks had to make protein stretch in the strangest ways. Peanut butter, shelf-stable and high in calories, was the hero ingredient of the decade. But here's the twist. It wasn't just for sandwiches anymore. The recipe was shockingly simple. Large sweet onions, boiled until tender, their centers scooped out and filled with a savory peanut butter mixture, sometimes blended with breadcrumbs, sometimes mixed with a splash of vinegar or Worcestershire for tang. Once stuffed, they'd be baked until the onion turned soft and caramelized, the peanut butter warm and nutty. To the wartime palate, this dish was practical, hearty, and cheap. It gave families the protein they needed without using a single ounce of meat. To modern taste buds? Well, let's just say reactions vary wildly. Some vintage cookbook writers swore by it, calling it an unexpectedly rich dinner entree. Others quietly admitted that the flavor was for the adventurous eater. Yet for families in the 1940s, it wasn't about gourmet, it was about getting dinner on the table, using whatever was available. Today, peanut butter stuffed onions have all but disappeared, living on mostly in yellowed recipe cards and the occasional retro dinner revival. But they remain a quirky reminder of America's wartime kitchen ingenuity, when necessity wasn't just the mother of invention. It was the mother of some of the strangest dinners ever served. And who knows, with the right seasoning and a touch of modern flair, this forgotten 1940s dinner might just make a comeback. Cabbage jelly ring, the dinner table's strangest centerpiece. If you had walked into a 1950s church potluck or a suburban holiday buffet, you might have seen it, glistening like a gemstone centerpiece, wobbling ever so slightly as it was carried to the table. This was the cabbage jelly ring. At first glance, it looked like a dessert, molded in the shape of a perfect ring, translucent and shimmering under the lights. But one curious whiff told a different story. This was no fruit gelatin. This was shredded cabbage, carrots, celery, and sometimes even green peppers, all suspended in a tangy lemon or lime-flavored Jell-O base. The idea came straight from post-war creativity when America was obsessed with gelatin molds. The reasoning was practical. Gelatin could stretch ingredients, keep them fresh longer, and make even humble vegetables feel like party food. And for thrifty homemakers, a cabbage jelly ring was the perfect way to impress guests without breaking the budget. Recipes often instructed you to first blanch the vegetables, mix them with vinegar or mayonnaise for tang, and then fold them into the gelatin before letting it set in a decorative mold. The result? A dish that was equal parts salad, centerpiece, and conversation starter. Some swore by its refreshing crunch and sweet sour bite. Others, politely nudged it around their plate. But for hostesses of the mid-century, it was a badge of culinary ambition, proof that you were keeping up with the trends in better homes and gardens and good housekeeping. By the 1970s, the novelty faded. Gelatin salads fell out of fashion, and the cabbage jelly ring became a relic of an era when presentation mattered as much as taste. Today, it survives mostly in the pages of vintage cookbooks, a strange, shimmering reminder that once upon a time, America didn't just eat cabbage. It put it in Jell-O. And if you think that's unusual, the next recipe will take the gelatin craze to a whole new level.